About this time last year, I was chatting with Travis Spencer over at Real Estate Mindset, and he asked me, Wendy, how would you define a housing crash? Well, that took me off guard because to me, the term crash is vague. Like, it makes for great videos and the term is used a lot, but has anyone ever put a specific definition to it? Well, after I thought about it for a little bit, I told him if Dallas seasonality failed, like if prices plummeted all through the summer months and into the fall, to me, I would probably consider that a crash. Informal definition, right? Because Dallas has always followed the historical pattern of prices peaking in the summer, having a predictable decline until it finally bottoms out in January, and then it starts going back up again. But for the sake of this video, all right, and because you guys know me, that's not nearly quantifiable enough. So I decided to go all out into the research. Because here's the thing, if we can give definition to a housing crash, we can know if Dallas is in one. So our first source, US News, tells us a housing market crash is typically defined by a rapid decline in values leading to a peak to trough fall of 20% or more. Then Real Estate U tells us a housing market correction is when there is a drop of about 10% in prices. Then we have NerdWallet, okay? It tells us prices typically fall by double-digit percentages during a crash and by single-digit percentages in a correction. All right, so roughly less than 10% we're gonna call a correction, and double-digit drops closing in on 20% or more is gonna fit our definition of a housing crash. And of course, we have my rather impromptu definition of a market that breaks seasonality. Now that we're armed with a definition, let's dive into the Dallas housing market with two questions. All right, first of all, have we broken seasonality? And secondly, where exactly do we stand with home prices? All right, now, spoiler alert here, okay? We're gonna see some of our cities actually did break seasonality and are in full definition of what you would call a crash. Whereas, honestly, prices are increasing in others. So this shouldn't surprise you if you understand housing is micro-local. The first thing you see is that for the metroplex as a whole, the median sales prices did indeed bottom out in January, rose consistently through the spring and summer, and then peaked in June, with prices increasing year over year by 0.3%. So our market followed seasonality, with home prices in June higher than they were in January. Now, if we looked at that picture alone, all right, we would see a boring but stable picture. You know, is the Dallas housing market crashing? No, it's just boring. All right, Dallas housing market's doing fine. All right, stop right there, okay? I want you to see that this is not enough information, okay? A bird's eye view of the Dallas Metroplex is not enough for you to make an informed decision about the market. I know you guys, you viewers, are smart home buyers, so you already know we have to dig deeper here. Let's take a look at these same metrics at a county level, starting with Denton County. Now, has it followed seasonality? Yeah, for the most part. Like, prices bottomed out in January, then began rising like normal. However, all right, they peaked in April, and they've been going down the past few months since then. So the peak and decline came a little earlier than normal, but prices were still higher in June than in January, and that's a major seasonality mark we're looking for. The median sales price percentage year over year is trending downward though, at negative 3.4%. So while Denton County hasn't broken seasonality, the fact that prices peaked early and they're now trending down year over year by 3.4% suggests we're looking at a mild correction. Now, moving on to Collin County. It also followed seasonality in the typical pattern we would expect with mild price appreciation. Prices were higher in June than in January, but year over year, they're experiencing a decent drop in median sales prices at negative 4.1%. So again, we're looking at a correction, but with expected seasonality. Next up is Tarrant County, which also followed the typical seasonal pattern. However, there was one small deviation. Prices dipped slightly in June, which is a bit unusual for that time of year, but they still remained higher than they were in January. Okay, year over year, the median sales price is down 1.4%. So what we're seeing here is a market that's relatively stagnant, but it's still moving within expected seasonal trends. Dallas County was similar with almost routine seasonal fluctuations, except that again, Prices dipped early in the summer and then came back up in June, but they were still higher than they were in January. Dallas median sales prices are actually trending upwards by 4.6% year over year. So the Dallas County market is actually rising. Rockwall County started out following seasonality with the typical pattern of low prices in June and then steadily climbing through the spring. But instead of continuing that upward momentum into the summer like you would, normally see, prices have leveled off over the past few months and it's become a bit stagnant. That said, June prices were still higher than they were in January, and with no year-over-year change in median sales price, Rockwall's looking like a stable market. So far of our 5 counties, all have followed that typical pattern of seasonality that we would expect, all right? That's about to change. Okay, so let's talk about Kaufman County. Now, this is the first we're seeing that has definitely not followed seasonality. Prices out in Kaufman have gone up and down, but they've trended generally down since January. They went up a bit in June, so we want to watch and see if we're going to see a new trend there. But this is an example of a suburb, okay, where we don't actually have a clear trend. It's volatile. It's going up and down each month, so it's hard to predict what's going to happen next. A consistent trend is important, okay? For Kaufman County, we're not seeing that. Even though prices, though, rose slightly in June, they still were not higher than what they were in January. You can see the downward trend in the year-over-year median sales price drop of 4.7%. So Kaufman is experiencing a correction and a more pronounced one than what we've seen with our other counties. Okay, let's talk about Ellis County now, our county to the south. It also followed seasonality in a very typical pattern with prices higher in June than in January. It's also experiencing the greatest rise in prices in the metroplex with a year-over-year increase of 5.6% in median sales price. Well, now that we've reviewed the data, we can see that of our 7 counties, 3 are correcting, 2 are stable, and 2 are rising. None of them are actually in crash territory. Of the 7, 6 of them followed our traditional seasonality. Now, as a smart buyer, you're probably starting to see there is opportunity here, but we need to dig deeper still to really pinpoint our biggest price drops, because I'm telling you, they're there. We've done the Metroplex as a whole. We've covered 7 of our main counties. Now let's go ahead and talk about our mega cities, okay? Have they followed seasonality? Are they crashing? Starting out with Dallas, it followed seasonality with prices higher in June than they were in January. The trend has been solid without any major swings. Year over year, the median sales price is up a very strong 12.8%. So Dallas is actually in a rising market right now. Now let's talk about Irving, okay? This is another one of our large cities. This one's been a bit more unpredictable, all right? Prices in June were the same as they were in January, and the path to get there has been really choppy with a lot of ups and downs. But here's the interesting part. Year over year, the median sales price is up 18.8%. So we've got some choppiness. We don't have a nice smooth trend, but I think it's safe to say that Irving's market is on the rise. Over in Fort Worth, we're seeing a steadier story. The city followed seasonality with prices higher in June than they were in January. The overall trend has been consistent without a whole lot of volatility, and the year-over-year median sales price is up just 0.9%. So it's not a big jump, but Fort Worth is holding stable. Next up, let's talk about Arlington. It also followed seasonality, ending with prices higher in June than in January, but the road to get there, it's been uneven. The market's been volatile, and the year-over-year median sales price is down 2.1%. So that puts Arlington in a mild correction territory. Now, if we stay close to our core cities, we're going to see similar trends where suburbs are generally following seasonality, if not a bit choppy, and then rising in median sales price year over year. If by this point you're like, now wait a minute, Wendy, where's the juicy stuff, right? Where's the opportunity? Well, hang on, because now we're going to check out our Exurbs. We're going to see our fastest growing Exurbs with the highest amount of new construction are where our biggest price corrections are. Let's start in the far north with our sister cities of Anna and Melissa, which actually, when it comes to schools, they're not sisters at all, okay? With Melissa aiming for perfection with their school scores and then Anna still needing a bit of work. Still, when it comes to our price action, these two are both bypassing seasonality. The market's been pretty choppy, but overall it's trending downward with prices lower in June than they were in January. Median sales prices are down in both suburbs, with Melissa down by 8.8% and Anna down by 7%. So both of these are clearly in correction territory. And you know who's following a trend almost exactly like them? Northlake. I mean, it's also growing incredibly fast. According to an article on fastest growing cities in Dallas, Northlake has seen a 69% surge in its population. But it's also breaking away from seasonality. All right, in Northlake, prices bottomed out in February. Then they leaped in April, then they dropped sharply into June. June's prices were only slightly lower than January's, but year over year, the median sales price is down negative 10.1%. So I would call that a strong correction. Let's head on over to Salina now. When you talk about fast growing, all right, this one's got it. In fact, Salina is the first city on the list of fastest growing cities in Dallas. According to the article, it has seen 104% growth over 2 years. So you would think with this much growth, it wouldn't be vulnerable to price drops, right? Well, unfortunately, you'd be wrong, okay? Our builders have gotten carried away and they have flooded the market with inventory. I mean, check out the amount of homes for sale. New construction inventory is up 72.6%. Pre-owned home inventory is up 83.9%. But jumping into the data, let's see if it has followed seasonality. Well, the answer is a big no, okay? Instead of prices rising after January, they have generally declined with only like a brief rise in April. And not only were June prices lower than in January, but the year-over-year drop, okay, it is steep. We're talking down 18.7%. So that is going to put this suburb in housing crash territory. All right, it is really looking rough. South of Salina, we have Prosper, and Prosper tells a different story. With 25% growth, Prosper followed a somewhat typical seasonal pattern. Again, a little choppy, but prices were higher in June than in January. So that's a positive sign, okay? But the year-over-year median sales price is down slightly at negative 1.8%. So this one falls into the stagnant category. So that pattern of choppy seasonality with prices ending up basically stagnant. All right, well, guess what? We also see that in both Fate and Forney. Fate and Forney are also growing at a decent pace, with Forney at 37% growth and Fate at 27%. And just like Prosper, these two cities did follow seasonality, but the ride was a little bumpy, all right? Prices were higher in June than January, which is what we're looking for, but just barely. All right, the year-over-year change in median sales price is up 0.1% in Forney and down negative 1.5% in Fate. So with both Prosper, Fate, and Forney, we're looking at a market that's basically holding steady. Okay, let's take a look at two markets that are actually on the rise. We have Justin with a population growth of 27% and Lavon with growth of 46%. Now these are both rising markets, but only one followed seasonality, or at least somewhat, all right? Lavon's market was a bit choppy, but prices are ultimately higher in June than they were in January. Now, Justin, on the other hand, it had a price bump in February, but from there, it's pretty much been on a general downward trend. The median sales price change year over year is up 5.2% for Lavon, and surprisingly, it's up 6.6% in Justin. On the other side of Denton from Justin, the city of Aubrey's population has grown by 59%, and it's really not doing what it's supposed to do with seasonality. It trended downward from January to April, then it rose in May and June. Prices did end up slightly higher in June than in January, but the path to get there, okay, was anything but predictable and stable. There's not a trend there that buyers can rely on. Now, overall, the market has taken a hit with a 7.7% year-over-year drop in our median sales price, pointing, unfortunately, to a clear correction. Royce City, also growing by 46%, did almost the opposite with price movement. Prices rose from January through May, then they had a big drop into June. So again, not typical seasonality there. Prices were lower in June than they were in January, and the city is generally declining in median sales prices. The year-over-year change is down 2.9%, so we're looking at a mild correction here. Okay, so far the only crashing market we've seen is Salina, but let's go ahead and take a look at one that's headed that way and another one that's already there. Princeton's population has surged by 35%. Prices rose from January to April, then instead of the normal rise into the summer, they began to drop. Prices were lower in June than they were in January. The overall decrease in median sales prices is definitely pushing crash territory at negative 10.1%. Now, as of now, we're still marginally calling it a correction, okay, but that's borderline. Argyle, though, is past the point of what we would call a correction. Prices in Argyle rose steadily from March through May, but then they dropped in June, enough to bring June prices below where they started in January. And on top of that, the year-over-year median sales price has dropped by a sharp 12.5%, which puts Argyle in crash territory by most definitions. Of our 13 fastest growing cities, we see 2 in our crash category, one which is way more significant than the other. All right, we have 6 in a correction, 3 that are just kind of boring, like stable and stagnant, and then 2 where prices are rising. Okay, now that you know we've got some corrections going on, you're probably wondering, when will prices stop falling? Well, there are a lot of opinions on this. I mean, first of all, you have the often hotly contested prices versus rates debate. With this, if you can, okay, picture 2 very different opinions here. In your pricing camp, okay, they're gonna say that home prices have to come down, that they are going to continue falling because they're unhinged from fundamentals. Now, what do they mean by that? Well, basically, they're saying that home values will stop falling when prices realign with fundamentals. Okay, so I'm sure your next question is, what are the fundamentals? Well, they are the core things that usually determine what a house should cost. All right, starting with income, what people in the area earn. If incomes don't go up, but home prices do, something's off. Next, we have interest rates, the cost to borrow money. Okay, so we're talking about mortgage rates here. When rates are low, people can afford higher prices. When rates are high, people can afford less. Another fundamental, rent prices. If owning costs way more than renting, that's a red flag. We also have supply and demand. How many homes are for sale versus how many buyers are looking. And then our last fundamental, local economy and job growth. All right, strong job markets attract buyers, boosting prices. But then a weak economy means less buying power and puts pressure on prices to stay reasonable. So this is what the pricing advocates ride on, that home prices need to keep falling until they come back into alignment with fundamentals. On the other hand, your mortgage rate camp will say prices will stop falling when mortgage rates drop. The interest rate camp, if you will, okay? They're gonna point out that every 1% drop in mortgage rates is equivalent to a 10% drop in home prices. Interest rate drops are a powerful influence on the market, okay? And that is just simple math that you can't deny. Well, like I said, start looking into it and you are gonna see some strong opinions between these two. Like in almost every video I have made about rates, I will have someone strongly disagree with me about rates being relevant. The home pricing camp is going to say this is not about rates, it is about prices. They'll say that if this were about rates, the forward commitments the home builders are offering with low rates, okay, that would fix everything. And I won't lie, I mean, they have a point there. And I would say that would be particularly relevant in the Exurbs, where the new construction is. In the heart of Dallas, though, okay, forward commitments won't make a difference because you don't have new construction builders there to offer them. The mortgage rate contenders are going to point out 2020 and how quickly prices skyrocketed when mortgage rates were too low. Mortgage rates make a difference, and also the math shows that. Okay, back to our question. When will prices stop falling? Well, if you align with the pricing advocates, it will be when home prices drop low enough to align with fundamentals. If you align with the rate advocates, okay, it'll be when mortgage rates go down. Now, if you are wanting to take advantage and buy at the very bottom, you need to know home prices will not stop dropping overnight, okay? There are signs you want to be watching for, okay? Are you ready? First red flag that a bottom is forming is when inventory, which has been climbing for months, suddenly levels off or begins to drop. That means sellers are pulling their listings, Builders are easing up on new releases, and the flood of listings in the market is slowing down. Next, look at price reductions. When price cuts start shrinking, either fewer homes are cutting or the cuts aren't as deep, that's another early sign that demand is creeping back in. Buyers are starting to bite again. Third, watch days on market. If homes were sitting for 45 days last month, but now they're moving in 30, that's momentum. It means buyers are watching and jumping on the homes they see as a deal. Lastly, you'll see pending sales. Homes going under contract start to pick up. This is one of the clearest forward indicators that demand is returning, and that puts a floor under prices. So what does this mean for you as a buyer? Well, now you see what a Dallas housing crash looks like. All right, it is super micro-local. In some areas, we see a huge correction. In others, prices are rising. In some, you're gonna have a huge tactical advantage. In other areas, picture yourself falling in love with a home. You go in confidently with a low ball offer, and then someone else snatches up the house. You didn't know your market. So I can't emphasize this enough, okay? You have to know your market before buying in it. And one of the big reasons I say that is if you don't have market knowledge, you're going to be taken advantage of. Texas just lends itself to overpaying because it's a non-disclosure state. As an individual, you can't see sold prices, so you can't track dropping prices. And by the way, if everything I'm saying completely sounds foreign to you, I explain it more in this video, which you might want to check out next. In the meantime, this is Wendy Pinnell, and I will catch you on the next video.